Hello and welcome to the Daily Bible Project podcast. And we're at episode 76 of season 2, where we're working together through the book of Genesis. I'd remind you that if you want, you can go right back all the way to the beginning of all the daily podcasts we've done since launching about 6 months ago, where we begin by season 1, taking an overview of each and every one of the 66 books of our Bible, and then the series working together through the book of Genesis. So the text we're covering today is the close of Genesis chapter 9, where we've been looking at the curse on Canaan, and we're going to consider today what it means today. By the way, the transcript of all these podcasts is available in the episodes notes section of any audio version of the podcast that you might be listening to. Alright, we talked about the theme of blessings and curses last time, and there's one more thing to say about that. That is that God cursed the line of Canaan, and he cursed them with servitude because they'd showed disrespect towards Noah. But at the same time, he blessed Shem and Japheth because they had showed respect to their father's vulnerable situation. I think the real point of this passage is not the nakedness, it's not even the drunkenness, it's not even really the curse or the blessing, although, of course, those are big parts of it. The main point of the passage, which we have to be careful not to overlook, is the promise to the Israelites, the promise that they were to enter the land of the Canaanites. And when they did so, that they should not hesitate in making their inhabitants subservient, because God had already declared that they should put them in that position. Now, to modern ears, that might sound a little harsh. Don't forget that coming under the servitude of the Israelites would have been a way back for some of these people to come under the blessing of God again. The problem in this passage for some is they think that the Father committed the Son, but they see the Son getting cursed. And that doesn't sound fair to the modern ear, but there's really something else going on here. We know it does say several times in the Old Testament that the sins of the father are punished in the children. It does so specifically in Exodus. It says this, I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sins of their parents to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me. That's Exodus chapter 20, verse 5, by the way. Now, the reason I bring this up is it explains completely what's going on here. But did you hear the whole of that verse? It ended with the phrase, of those who hate me. So the reason that these future generations gets judged is because they committed the same sin as well. The sin isn't that their father or grandfather sinned and that then the children or grandchildren get punished. The fact is that the father commits the original sins and the sons and daughters, the future generations that follow on from that father, commit the same sin. And it is because of that that they are come under judgment. Like father, like son, we say, but for these future generations it was even worse. You will notice as you progress through the Old Testament that the Canaanite people constantly led Israel astray. All the way through the Old Testament, they continued to pose a threat to Israel's holiness. Now, we see this characteristic in these events in the story of Ham and his attitude towards his father, but these descendants are not cursed with bondage because of what he did. They were cursed because of what they subsequently did. In other words, they acted just like he had done, and that's the real point of the story here. This passage ultimately teaches that sin against the father leads to slavery. There's a curse. The curse is only enacted out when the subsequent generations choose to sin. Jesus is heard to say in John chapter 8, he who commits sin is the slave of sin. So that begs the question, how many times do you have to do something in order to become a slave to sin? Well, in some cases, just once. Some sins we only need to do once to get hooked. Because if you hadn't done that thing for the first time, then you wouldn't subsequently have ended up doing it repeatedly. And by nature, that means then you wouldn't have become a slave to it. So this passage is talking about the fact that sin is like a curse that leads to slavery. But there is also the bigger point in this passage that God blesses. As a matter of fact, I think these two ideas really are the sum of this passage. The curse of sin is that thing which leads to slavery, but God also blesses those who are faithful. However, that blessing should always lead to the blessing of others. What a great lesson. Don't sin, or you'll end up a slave to sin. Instead, live in the blessing of God and go and bless others. Be blessed so you too can bless others. That's the point of this passage, and that's the point I want to end with. When God blesses you, we are meant to throw open wide the doors of our tent and call others into that space to experience that same blessing. Has the Lord blessed you? Then go bless other people. Go and be a blessing to everyone.
Okay everyone, that's it for this time. Thank you for joining me. Now the place to go to connect to this and any other ministries I'm involved in is the podcast notes section of the audio podcast on the Buzzsprout website, or by looking in the episode notes section on whatever app provider you use. Within that you'll not only find the transcript of each talk, but you'll also find links to all the ministries and the way to connect with us, including the Facebook page, my YouTube channel, and links both to this, the daily podcast, and the Living in Faith Everyday podcast, which is a weekly roundup of all the various Bible study and talks that I'm doing over the period of the preceding week. You'll also find links there to my SoundCloud and my Bandcamp page, where I create the background music and the sound design of these podcasts. But with that, all I'd like to say is thank you for joining me, and I hope to join with you again very soon.